The knock on my door was not just loud, it was violent. Two men in cheap uniforms barged onto my porch, flashing fake badges and claiming they were HOA officers. They spoke with an arrogance that said they thought I'd break at the first threat. "We're here to seize this property for unpaid fees," one barked. "My house. My sanctuary." They thought I was just another quiet homeowner too scared to fight back. What they didn't know was that I wasn't some average guy, I was a retired Navy SEAL. Years of discipline, strategy, and survival don't wash away just because you hang up the uniform. I sized them up in seconds. Imposters, sloppy, and way out of their depth. They thought they had power. They thought they could intimidate me. But what was about to unfold would prove just how wrong they were. The morning started out the way I liked it. Slow, steady, and quiet. I had been retired for a few years now, and most days I tried to keep things simple. My house sat at the end of a winding road, just far enough from town to give me privacy, but close enough to grab groceries or meet an old friend for coffee if I wanted. That morning, I was sitting on the porch with a mug of hot black coffee, the steam curling into the cool air. The sky was pale blue, the kind of clear you only get after a night of heavy rain, and the birds were busy chattering in the trees. Nothing about the day suggested trouble. If anything, it felt like peace. I had been lost in thought, staring at the horizon, when I noticed a car rolling slowly up my driveway. My first instinct wasn't suspicion. I had neighbors who occasionally dropped by, and deliveries were common enough. But something about this car made me sit up a little straighter. It wasn't marked with any company logo, just a dusty, older, model sedan with tinted windows. The way it pulled in wasn't casual either. Whoever was inside drove like they owned the place. Tires crunching hard over the gravel, no hesitation. I set my mug down and leaned forward. Two men stepped out, both dressed in uniforms that looked like they came straight off a rack at a cheap costume store. Dark slacks, matching shirts, shiny metal badges pinned to their chests. At a distance, maybe someone would believe they were official, but up close, the details were all wrong. Their belts didn't carry any real equipment, just fake radios and cheap flashlights. Their shoes weren't polished, and their posture wasn't trained. They were playing a role, and not very well. The taller of the two adjusted his cap and started walking toward me with the confidence of a man who thought authority came from volume, not respect. "Sir," he barked, not even bothering with a polite greeting. "We're here on official HOA business." That made me pause. HOA business. I almost laughed. My neighborhood didn't even have a homeowners association. Out here, folks minded their own business, paid their taxes, and took care of their land. No one was about to hand over control to some board of busybodies. Still, I didn't move from my chair. "Is that right?" I asked calmly, watching them climb the porch steps like they had every right to be there. The shorter one pulled out a clipboard stacked with papers. His hands shook slightly, betraying nerves. He cleared his throat. "According to our records, you're delinquent on HOA dues totaling $5,000. Effective immediately, this property is being confiscated." I stared at him. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a patchy beard and sweat stains already forming on his shirt. He said the words like he had rehearsed them but didn't understand half of what they meant. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to squirm. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "Confiscated for unpaid dues. That's not how it works, and funny thing, there is no HOA here." The taller one stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "Don't get smart with us. We're authorized to enforce property codes. If you don't comply, we'll remove you by force." Now I did laugh, a short, sharp sound that made them both stiffen. Remove me from my own house. I stood slowly, and though I didn't raise my voice, I let the weight of my presence fill the space between us. Years of training in the Navy SEALs had taught me how to control a room without needing to shout. My movements were measured, deliberate, and calm, but I could see in their eyes they sensed a shift. The shorter one glanced nervously at his partner, as if realizing maybe they had picked the wrong house. But the tall one pressed on, trying to regain control. "Listen, old man," he sneered. "We don't want trouble. Just hand over the keys, pack your things, and leave quietly. Otherwise, we'll have to escalate this." I let his words hang in the air for a moment, then tilted my head slightly. "You boys have no idea what you're walking into, do you?" The taller one opened his mouth to retort, but I raised a hand, stopping him cold. "First off, I've lived here long enough to know every inch of this land. There's no HOA, no dues, no authority that gives you the right to even set foot on my porch." Second, I took a step closer, closing the gap until I was just a foot away. "You don't threaten a man in his own home, especially not me." I saw it, then the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was bigger than me in height, sure, but size doesn't win fights. Training does. Control does, and I had both. The shorter man shuffled his clipboard awkwardly and tried to sound firm. "Will we call back up if we have to?" That almost made me laugh again. Back up. Like they had a real team waiting around the corner. Their car was the only one in sight, and if they had partners, they wouldn't have sent Tweedledee and Tweedledum to handle me. "Do that," I said evenly. "Call whoever you want. While you're at it, Why don't you tell me your names and badge numbers, and maybe show me those credentials a little slower this time so I can read them properly? The tall one's jaw clenched. He didn't like being challenged. He reached for the fake badge on his chest but didn't hold it out. He just tapped it with 2 fingers like it was supposed to mean something. This is all the authority I need. I shook my head slowly. No, that's not authority. That's theater, and you're not very good actors. The tension thickened. For a moment, no one moved. A crow cawed in the distance, cutting through the silence. The shorter man wiped sweat from his brow. I could feel their uncertainty growing with every second I stood calm in the face of their threats. They had come expecting fear. Instead, they found steel. Finally, I leaned just close enough so only they could hear me. My voice dropped low, steady, and cold. I've dealt with pirates, insurgents, and men who actually knew how to fight. You too, you're amateurs. And you're standing on the wrong porch. The taller one stepped back instinctively, though he tried to mask it with a scowl. The shorter one looked like he wanted to bolt right then. They hadn't expected resistance, let alone someone who refused to play along with their scam. I straightened up and pointed toward their car. You've got 10 seconds to get off my property before I make a call you won't like. Your choice. They hesitated, torn between pride and self-preservation. I could see the war behind their eyes. But the thing about bluffers is this. Once you stand firm, their power vanishes. And these two, they were bluffers through and through. The tall one muttered something under his breath and jerked his head toward the car. The shorter one followed, relief plain on his face. They stomped back down the driveway, trying to act tough, even in retreat. I watched them go, arms folded, until their car disappeared around the bend. Only then did I pick my coffee mug back up, now cold, and take a sip. I knew this wasn't over. Men like that didn't just give up after one failed attempt. They'd be back, and next time, they'd try harder. But I wasn't worried, because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that I wasn't just some quiet man living alone at the end of a road. I was a retired Navy SEAL, and this was my ground. And no one takes a SEAL's home without a fight. The morning encounter should have ended the matter. 2 men showing up in fake uniforms, trying to pass off as HOA enforcers, was laughable enough. Most people would have been rattled, maybe even intimidated into handing over money or signing something under pressure, but not me. I'd seen far scarier men in far worse places. If there was one thing the military had drilled into me, it was how to remain calm under pressure. Those guys were small-time grifters, and I had treated them as such. Still, something about the way they left bothered me. They hadn't bolted the way con artists usually do when a mark calls their bluff. They had retreated, yes, but not defeated. I had caught the look in the taller one's eyes when I warned him off. He wasn't finished, he was angry. Men like him didn't like being embarrassed, and I had embarrassed him on his own stage. I didn't go about the rest of my day pretending nothing had happened. Old habits die hard, and mine told me to expect a return. I did a perimeter walk of my property, the way I used to sweep an area before a night op. My land wasn't huge, but it had enough trees and brush around the edges to give cover if someone wanted to sneak in. I checked for tire tracks by the road, footprints near the fence, and made mental notes of anything that looked out of place. Nothing yet, but it was better to know what normal looked like so I could spot when something was off. Later that afternoon, I set up a few quiet precautions. I wasn't paranoid, just prepared. Motion lights at the corners of the house, a small camera tucked under the eaves of the porch, and inside, I laid out a few items where I could grab them quickly if needed, nothing extreme, just tools of control. A flashlight with extra weight in the handle, zip ties, a phone pre-programmed with the sheriff's direct line. You don't spend years being trained to anticipate danger, only to forget it once you're retired. By evening, I had almost convinced myself it might have been a one-off. Maybe they'd move on to an easier target. There were plenty of older folks in the county, some living alone, who wouldn't question a uniform or a badge. It made my blood boil to think of them being tricked into signing away savings, or even property. But just as I started to relax, headlights appeared at the end of my driveway again. This time, they didn't stop at the road like cautious visitors. They rolled right up, brash as before. The same car, the same 2 men. Only now, they had added one more, another broad-shouldered guy in the back seat. Reinforcements, just like they had threatened. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, waiting as they climbed out. The tall one, their self-appointed leader, tried to paste confidence over the unease I knew he still felt from this morning. "We warned you," he said, striding up the steps like he owned them. "Now we're back, and we won't ask nicely again." The new guy was quieter, hanging back a little, scanning my property with suspicious eyes. He didn't look like he bought their story any more than I did, but he was along for the ride. Maybe a hired thug, maybe just a friend who owed them a favor. Either way, his size was meant to intimidate. "Funny," I said evenly, "because I thought I made it clear this wasn't going to work out the way you wanted." The shorter one, still clutching that same clipboard, held it up again. "We have legal authority." "Stop," I cut him off, stepping forward. "You don't have authority, you don't have jurisdiction, you don't even have matching uniforms." That drew a few chuckles from neighbors who had started to gather at the edge of their yards. Small towns move fast when something strange happens. And by now word of these so-called HOA officers had spread. People were watching, whispering, recording with their phones, and that meant I wasn't the only one holding them accountable anymore. The tall one's face flushed red. He didn't like being mocked, especially in front of an audience. He jabbed a finger at me. Enough games. You either hand over the deed, or we'll come in and take what's ours. There it was. The escalation I had expected. My gut told me they weren't bluffing anymore. They were angry, cornered by exposure, and now doubling down. That made them unpredictably and dangerous. I didn't flinch. Step foot inside my house, I warned, my voice carrying across the yard, and you'll regret it. I don't scare easy, and I don't give ground that isn't yours. The quiet one, the new guy, shifted uncomfortably. He muttered something to the leader, who waved him off impatiently, but I saw the hesitation, the way his eyes darted toward the neighbors filming. He knew this was spiraling. I decided to turn the tables. Calmly, I pulled out my phone and held it up. See this? I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is recording. Every word, every move. And when I hand it to the sheriff, they'll have all the evidence they need to charge you with impersonating officers, attempted fraud, and trespassing. A ripple of murmur spread through the bystanders. The taller man's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He looked like he wanted to lunge at me, but he also knew the cameras had already sealed his fate. You think this is funny? He snapped. You think you can just I cut him off again, stepping closer. I do, because you're amateurs. You came here thinking you'd scare an old man into giving up his home, but you didn't check who you were dealing with. And let me give you a hint. I'm not the one who should be scared right now. That last part wasn't bravado. It was truth. I had been in situations where the wrong move meant life or death, where the line between victory and failure was razor thin. This was theater compared to that. And yet, the principle was the same. Maintain control, project calm, and let the opponent unravel. The taller man sputtered, searching for something to say, but nothing came out. The new guy looked like he wanted to leave. The shorter one clutched his clipboard like it was a shield. Finally, I broke the silence. You've got one chance to walk away. Take it, because the longer you stand here, the worse this gets for you. They didn't move at first. Pride is a stubborn thing, but the weight of the eyes on them, the cameras recording, and my steady gaze pressed harder than any fist could. At last, the leader cursed under his breath and motioned for the others to retreat. They stomped back to their car, slamming the doors with more force than necessary, and sped off into the night. The neighbors clapped quietly, relief mixing with curiosity. A few called out to me asking if I was okay, if I needed help. I thanked them, but told them I was fine. Fine, but alert. Because if I knew anything about men like that, it was that they didn't accept defeat easily. They'd be back. And next time, they'd try something even more desperate. As I went back inside, locking the door behind me, I thought about the times I'd been stationed overseas, dealing with threats that tested patience and resolve. This was different. Yes, but at its core it was the same game. Stand firm, outthink the enemy, and never let fear dictate your choices, they thought. I was just a homeowner. They thought I was an easy mark. They thought wrong, and when they returned, I'd be ready. The night after they came back, sleep didn't come easy. I kept replaying the scene in my head there. Red faces, the anger boiling beneath their threats, the way the tallest one clenched his fists as if he could barely stop himself from swinging. They hadn't walked away because they respected me. They had walked away because they were cornered, and cornered men don't stay quiet for long. I sat in my living room with the lights dimmed, scrolling through the footage on my phone. Every word, every bluff, every threat, it was all there. They had walked right up to my porch, in front of neighbors, and claimed they had the power to confiscate my home. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was damning. If I handed this to the sheriff, it would be enough to put them away for a good while, but I knew better than to assume it would be that simple. Men like them, once exposed, don't quietly shuffle off to jail. They try to destroy the evidence, silence the witness, and reclaim whatever pride they think they lost. That meant me. The next morning the phone rang early. It was the sheriff's office. Deputy Collins, a younger officer I had met a few times around town, was on the line. "Morning, sir," he said, his voice polite but curious. "We've had some calls from your neighbors. Something about fake HOA officers harassing you last night." I leaned back in my chair. "That's right, and I've got it all on video. You might want to see it." Within an hour, Collins pulled up in a patrol car, his uniform crisp, his notepad already in hand. He shook my hand firmly, the way men do when they want to show respect. I let him inside and played the footage for him on my TV. He watched quietly, jotting down notes, his jaw tightening a little more with every passing minute. When it was over, he let out a slow whistle. "That's not just harassment. That's impersonation of an officer, attempted fraud, maybe even attempted extortion. You said they came twice. Twice in one day," I confirmed. "And if I know their type, they'll be back again." Collins nodded grimly. "We'll put out a notice. Try to get ahead of it. but I'll be honest with you, guys like this usually have a whole racket going. If they targeted you, they've probably hit others too. We'll need time to track them down. I appreciated his honesty, but it didn't make me feel any safer. Time was exactly what these frauds would use to regroup. After Collins left, I stepped outside and looked around. The neighborhood was quieter than usual, people watching me from behind curtains or across yards. Some came up later, offering words of support, telling me how brave I had been. I thanked them, but I knew this wasn't about bravery. It was about preparation. Bravery without preparation is just recklessness, and recklessness gets people hurt. By late afternoon, I spotted something out of place. A dark SUV I hadn't seen before was parked 2 houses down. Windows tinted, engine running. No one got out. No one got in. It just sat there, watching. I went about my chores calmly, pretending not to notice, but my mind was racing. Was it them, or someone they sent? The tall one didn't strike me as a man who would take humiliation lightly. If he wanted to make a statement, tailing me was the first step. Instead of confronting them, I decided to let them stew. I carried on with my evening as usual, watering the garden, walking to the mailbox, checking the fence line. All the while, I could feel their eyes on me, but the longer I ignored them, the more frustrated they became. After half an hour, the SUV roared off, tires spitting gravel. That told me everything I needed to know. They were testing me, seeing if I'd get nervous, waiting for me to slip. That night, I double-checked my cameras and secured the doors. As I walked the hallways, memories came back to me. Patrols through dark villages overseas, moving silently, knowing danger could spring from any doorway. The same tension, the same sharp awareness, was alive in me now. Retirement hadn't dulled it. It had just been waiting for the right moment to surface. The next day, the threats escalated. A letter was slipped under my door. No envelope, no stamp, just a sheet of paper with bold letters scratched in black marker. Give up the deed, or next time we won't knock. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note. The handwriting was messy, rushed, like the words were written in anger. It wasn't a bluff anymore. It was a promise. I called Deputy Collins immediately and read him the note. That's direct intimidation, he said firmly. Don't engage with them. Let us handle it. I hear you, I told him. But you should understand something. Deputy, I've been handling men like this my entire life. I won't provoke them, but I also won't sit on my hands while they circle my home. There was silence on the line for a moment. Finally, he sighed. Just be careful. Don't give them a reason to escalate. What he didn't understand was that they already had escalated. The moment they slipped that note under my door, they made it personal. That evening, I set a trap of sorts. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a dim glow in the living room, and sat back in the shadows where I could see the front porch. I left the curtains slightly open, giving just enough of a view to tempt anyone watching. Hours passed. The house was still. Around midnight, I caught movement, a figure creeping toward the porch, crouched low, then another behind him. They were back. My pulse steadied, not racing, just steady, controlled. I eased the safety light on and pressed record on the interior camera. Through the glass, I could see them pulling something from a bag. Crowbar. They were going to break in. I waited until the first man's hand touched the door handle before I flipped on the floodlights. The yard lit up like a stadium, and both men froze in place, deer caught in headlights. I stepped forward, my silhouette filling the window, my voice cutting through the night. You just made your second mistake. They bolted, scrambling back, toward the dark SUV that had been idling at the curb. Tires squealed, and they vanished into the night. But this time, I had more than just video of them bluffing. I had footage of them attempting to break in, tools in hand, caught in the act. The sheriff wouldn't be able to brush that aside. I saved the recording 3 different ways on my phone, on a backup drive, and uploaded to a secure cloud. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to do more than steal a device. When I finally sat back down, the adrenaline hit me. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of readiness that always followed close calls. My training had kept me alive once again, but I also knew something else. This wasn't the end. Men like them didn't back down until they were forced to, and now that I had crossed them twice, they wouldn't stop with threats. They'd be coming harder, louder, maybe even with more numbers. What they didn't realize was that they were writing their own downfall with every move, because the deeper they pushed, the more evidence I gathered, and the more evidence I gathered, the tighter the noose grew around their necks. I leaned back, staring at the cold coffee on the table, the same way I had when this all began. You boys picked the wrong house, I muttered to myself, and the wrong man. The night they tried to pry open my door stayed in my mind like a bad taste you can't wash away. I had dealt with hostile men before, and I knew what drove them. Pride, anger, the hunger to take what they couldn't earn. These 3 were no different and were desperate enough to impersonate officers, bold enough to march up in broad daylight, and stupid enough to return after being caught twice. That combination made them dangerous. The next morning, I didn't bother with coffee. On the porch, I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the footage I had captured. There they were, crouching at my door, one of them holding a crowbar like he was about to smash his way in. Every angle was clear thanks to the floodlights I had installed. I had them on record, and that was enough to bury their scam. I copied the footage to 3 different devices and tucked them into separate hiding spots. If they came back, they wouldn't be able to erase what I had gathered. Then I called Deputy Collins again. When he arrived, I showed him the video. His reaction said it all, his lips pressed thin, his brows pulling down as he shook his head. "This isn't just harassment anymore," he muttered. "This is attempted burglary, maybe even home invasion." "They're getting bolder," I said evenly. "They won't stop until they're put away," Collins agreed. He promised to file charges and start the process of tracking them down. But the wheels of law move slow. I knew those men weren't going to wait around politely for the sheriff's department to knock on their door. They'd be planning something bigger, something they thought would finally break me. That night, I doubled my watch. I kept the lights low inside, cameras rolling outside, and stayed by the window where I could see the road. Hours stretched long, the kind of silence that makes your ears strain for the smallest sound. By midnight, I saw headlights again. This time, there wasn't just one car. There were 2. They parked just beyond my driveway, engines running. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. They weren't here to talk anymore. I didn't move right away. I stayed in the shadows, studying their movements. 4 men climbed out too. I recognized instantly the tall one and the clipboard carrier, and 2 new faces. Heavier builds. One carried what looked like a length of pipe in his hand, swinging it casually as they whispered to each other. They spread out, circling my yard like predators testing a fence. My cameras caught them clearly, every shadow, every step. I didn't panic. I didn't rush outside. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed Collins directly. "Deputy," I said in a calm whisper. "They're back. 4 of them this time. 2 cars. They're circling the house right now. I'm on my way." He replied immediately, his voice clipped. "Stay inside. Lock down. Don't engage unless you have to." "Copy that," I said. Old habits die hard, even retired. The language of precision stuck with me. I locked the doors, slid the heavy bar into place across the back door, and waited. My heart was steady, the way it always was before action. I had learned long ago that fear burns out quick when you trust your training. Outside, I heard footsteps on the gravel. Then a low voice, angry, "Hushed, kick it in." The sound of boots slammed against the porch door. The wood shuddered, but it held. They kicked again, harder this time, cursing under their breath. The glass rattled. I let them try. Every second they wasted was another second closer to the sheriff arriving, and every blow they landed was being recorded by my cameras. They thought they were in control, but they were digging their own grave with every stomp of their boots. Finally, the tall one shouted, "Forget the door, go around back." I moved through the dark hallway, silent on my feet, until I was near the back door. I could see their silhouettes through the window. One of them raised a pipe, about to smash the glass. That's when I flipped the switch. The floodlights blazed to life again, flooding the yard in harsh white. The men froze, blinking, like startled animals. And then, from behind them, came the sound I had been waiting for. Sirens that they whipped their heads around. Panic etched across their faces as flashing red and blue lights tore down the road. In seconds, 2 sheriff's vehicles skidded to a halt, doors flying open. Deputies poured out, weapons drawn, voices booming commands. "Hands up, drop it, on the ground, now." Chaos erupted. One of the men bolted for the woods, only to be tackled by a deputy before he got 10 feet. Another dropped the pipe and fell to his knees, hands shaking in the air. The tall one cursed and tried to argue, but he was shoved face first into the gravel, cuffs snapping around his wrists. I stepped outside onto the porch, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. For the first time, I let myself smile. Not a broad grin, just the small, satisfied curve of a man who had waited for the right moment, and one. Deputy Collins spotted me and hurried over. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "They never got past the door." He nodded, relief clear in his eyes. "We've got them all. With your footage and tonight's attempted break-in, they won't be seeing daylight for a long time." The tall one snarled from where he was pinned to the ground. "This isn't over, old man. You hear me? You'll regret this." I looked down at him, my expression hard. "You've already lost. The only thing you'll regret is thinking you could take what isn't yours." The deputies hauled them to their feet, marched them to the waiting cars, and shoved them inside. The night was filled with the crackle of radios, the slam of doors, and the fading wail of sirens as the convoy pulled away. When the dust settled, Collins stayed behind a moment. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled yourself well tonight. If you hadn't kept your head, this could have gone a lot worse." "Experience," I said simply. "I've been here before, just in different places." He gave me a respectful nod. "Get some rest. You've earned it. We'll keep patrols close by the next few nights, just in case." After he left, I stood, alone on the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The adrenaline drained from me, leaving behind only quiet resolve. The house was safe, for now. The men who had threatened me were in cuffs, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the true end. Scams like theirs don't operate alone. There are always bigger fish, people pulling strings from behind the curtain, And I had a feeling this wasn't just about MIT, was about something larger. I took one last look at the road where the deputies had vanished, then stepped back inside, locking the door firmly behind me. Chapter closed, I muttered, but not the book. The sharp wail of sirens echoed down the street, growing louder with every second, and the two imposters sitting on my lawn stiffened like cornered animals. Their cocky postures had already melted away, but now their fear was painted so clearly across their faces that anyone watching could see they knew their game was over. I stayed calm, arms crossed, my phone still recording. Years of Navy SEAL discipline had taught me how to hold steady under pressure, and compared to the chaos of combat, this little skirmish with frauds pretending to be HOA officers was almost laughable. Still, I wasn't about to let my guard down, not until the professionals arrived to take over. Two sheriff's deputies stepped out of their vehicles as they pulled up to the curb. Their uniforms were clean, their badges real, and their presence radiated the kind of authority that no fake could ever imitate. One of the deputies, a tall man with sharp eyes, immediately noticed the imposters' cheap badges and mismatched uniforms. He gave me a nod, then approached them with one hand on his holstered weapon. "Stand up slowly, hands where I can see them," he ordered, his voice steady but commanding. The imposters hesitated, glancing nervously at each other like children caught stealing cookies. I took a single step forward, my body language reminding them that trying anything stupid would be a very bad idea. Reluctantly, they obeyed, standing with their hands raised. The deputy closest to them quickly moved in, confiscating their fake badges and handcuffing them with practiced efficiency. The other deputy looked at me, and I handed over my phone with the video recording. "Got everything on tape?" I told him. "From the moment they stepped onto my property." "Good work," he said with a firm nod. "This will make things a lot easier." Neighbors had gathered on sidewalks and porches by now, whispering and pointing. Some held their phones up, recording the scene, clearly shocked that something so dramatic was happening right here in our quiet neighborhood. For many of them, it was probably the first time they had ever seen real law enforcement expose con artists in action. To me, it was another example of why vigilance mattered. Evil doesn't always come crashing in through the front door with guns blazing. Sometimes it shows up in cheap uniforms, trying to scare honest people into surrendering what's rightfully theirs. The deputies separated the imposters and began questioning them. The two men tried to spin stories, but their lies collapsed within seconds. They couldn't provide names of supervisors, addresses of offices, or even consistent details about their so-called HOA. One of them grew visibly desperate, insisting they were just doing their jobs. The deputy cut him off sharply. "Your job is impersonating an officer and attempting to commit fraud. That's a felony, and now you're going to answer for it." As the words hit, one of the frauds broke down, his shoulders slumping as he realized there was no way out. He muttered something about being hired by a guy to scare people into paying fake dues. The deputies exchanged knowing looks. They'd probably seen schemes like this before. But it wasn't every day that scammers tried it on the wrong man, especially not a man like me. I stood by quietly, watching the arrests unfold. My training told me not to gloat or taunt the defeated. It wasn't worth lowering myself. But I did lock eyes with one of the imposters for a moment. He stared at me with a mixture of resentment and regret. He had come to my house expecting an easy victim, someone who would cave under pressure. Instead, he had run straight into a wall he couldn't move. Once the cuffs were secure and the situation under control, one deputy approached me again. "Sir, we really appreciate how you handled this. If you hadn't kept calm and gathered evidence, this could have gone very differently. People like this prey on fear. You didn't give them a chance." I nodded. "Fear only works if you let it. I've been in situations far worse than this. These guys never stood a chance." The deputy allowed himself a small smile. "Well, today they picked the wrong house." The crowd of neighbors began to murmur in agreement. A few even clapped softly as the imposters were led to the patrol cars. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, a sweet woman in her 70s, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "If they had come to my door first, I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have believed them." Her words hit me harder than I expected. That was the real danger. These scams weren't designed to trick people like me, hardened by years of service. They were aimed at vulnerable people like Mrs. Jenkins, good-hearted folks who trusted authority. That thought lit a fire inside me. Stopping these two today wasn't just about protecting my home, it was about protecting everyone else they might have targeted next. The deputies loaded the imposters into the squad cars and prepared to drive them to the station. One of the officers gave me his card, assuring me that the DA would likely want me as a key witness. I promised I'd provide whatever testimony was needed. As the engine started and the cars pulled away, the imposters glanced back through the windows, their expressions dark and defeated. When the street finally quieted, the neighbors gathered around me. They wanted to know what had happened, what the men had said, and how I had known they weren't real. I explained everything as clearly as I could, warning them to always ask questions, demand proof, and never let anyone push their way into a home without proper authority. By the time I finished, I could see relief on their faces. They understood, now that vigilance was the best defense. That night, sitting back on my porch with the crickets chirping and the stars scattered across the sky, I finally let out a long breath. The adrenaline had carried me through the day, but now I felt the weight of it all. My mind drifted back to my years in the Navy, to moments when quick decisions had meant life or death. This wasn't war, but the principles were the same: stay calm, stay sharp, and never let fear dictate your choices. The thought of Mrs. Jenkins stuck with me. What if she had opened her door instead of me? What if she had handed over money, or even signed papers under pressure? Those imposters could have stolen everything from her. That was the real victory today, not just saving my own home, but stopping two criminals before they could devastate someone who couldn't fight back. In the days that followed, word spread quickly through the neighborhood and even into nearby towns. The sheriff's office released a statement warning residents about scams, and I was mentioned by name as the homeowner who had helped expose the fraud. Some people called me a hero, but I didn't see it that way. I had simply done what needed to be done. Old habits die hard, and protecting people was still part of who I was. Weeks later, I was asked to attend a community safety meeting at the local town hall. Standing at the podium, I shared my story, explaining step by step how I had spotted the imposters, kept control of the situation, and gathered evidence. People listened intently, scribbling notes, asking questions. When I finished, I closed with something I truly believed: strength doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it's just standing your ground, refusing to be intimidated, and remembering that no one can take your home, your freedom, or your dignity without your permission. As the crowd applauded, I knew the fight was worth it. The imposters had lost more than their freedom that day; they had lost their power. And for me, it was a reminder that even in retirement, my mission wasn't over. Protecting people wasn't just a job I once had, it was who I was. And as long as I had breath in my body, I would never stop standing up to those who tried to take what didn't belong to them. That night, back at my porch, I raised a glass to the stars. My house was still mine. My neighbors were safer, and two frauds were behind bars where they belonged. The war was long behind me, but the warrior in me was still alive, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. For more powerful real-life inspired stories, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Bright Reality.